This is Michael Campbell, and I'm glad to be able to join you through this video for this special feature about Christmas in our Adventist past. I'm excited because this is an opportunity during this holiday season to be able to reflect about what Christmas means for us as Christians and as Seventh-day Adventists. But I want to ask you to bow your heads with me as we pray and ask God to bless our time together. Loving Father in heaven, we're thankful for the opportunity to reflect a little bit about church history, even some Adventist history, and I pray that you'd help us to better understand and appreciate your birth, your coming, your sacrifice here on earth. And so bless our time in Jesus' name. Amen. It's been an exciting couple of weeks. Earlier this semester, I was asked by the editors at the Adventist Review that they needed an article right away and that I had about a week to write it. I guess, I don't know what happened, but they said, can you fill in and write this piece about the story of Christmas in church history and in Adventist history? And if you check this month's issue of the Adventist Review, there is an article, and I'm going to be sharing with you some things that I discovered, both that you can find in the article, so if you would like to, you can read that on the Adventist Review website. In fact, I've been a little bit chagrined, even a bit surprised, as I've looked at that article on the webpage, that for the last 8 days, at least as of the time of this recording, that it's been the number one article on the most popular article on that webpage, which I doubt I know it's not because of me, it's because the topic of Christmas is really quite of interest to a lot of people. How did our pioneers, how did people in church history celebrate Christmas? I've discovered that there are a lot of myths in church history. There's a lot of myths that are related to that people really don't understand. Well, I want to begin on an anecdotal note because Christmas is something that's been always very special in our family. We love Christmas traditions and putting up the Christmas tree and unwrapping presents. I have fond memories growing up as a child and coming downstairs to find some presents, and not only to receive presents, but to give presents to others. These kinds of traditions that are in the home and in the family. And as I've grown up and matured, I've had to ask myself the question, is it possible to be a good, committed Christian and continue to celebrate Christmas? At times, I've heard some questions, some rumblings. I suspect that's why the article has been quite popular, because it's even a bit controversial, I dare say, to understand the origins of Christmas. In order to do that, one other thing I want to mention is not only have we had these fond memories of Christmas in our own home and family, but one other dimension that's kind of neat, and our missionary experience as a family. We spent about 5.5 years in the Philippines right before coming to Southwestern Adventist University. And during that time, I discovered that not only did we love Christmas in a Western context, but there are many others who also enjoy Christmas around the world. And I have a few pictures up here on the screen. I wanted you to see those because I think it's kind of fun to be able to visualize that Christmas has grown to become a truly global holiday where people just relish and enjoy this festive time of year. And I remember going to the shopping mall, the Mall of Asia, and some of these other kinds of places, that large malls in the Philippines. And I would come in, we would have shorts on. It was hot that time of year. It's the seasons are a little bit different than they are here, and it's close to the equator. And so we'd go in shorts and maybe a t-shirt and even air conditioning inside the mall. And then there would be these various songs like Let It Snow, Let It Snow. And I thought to myself, I wonder how many people in this mall actually have seen snow before. In fact, it was quite comical. One time we went home, it was winter back here in the United States, and my students told me, when you come back, please just bring us back some snow, as if I could just wrap it up and bring it on the airplane. So you can see there's a lot of decorations. Here's a church that was lighted up. That these are the kinds of things that the Filipinos, and here in a different culture, a different place, they just love to embrace Christmas, even though in many ways it's something that they have adopted. It's become syncretistic, how people have changed and adapted it with different meanings in different places and different times. By the way, one little extra tidbit is the Filipinos have the claim to have the longest Christmas holiday season of any people group, any culture of the world. It would not be unusual, even in early August, to see stores starting to put up Christmas trees in the malls and different Christmas kinds of decorations. Well, let's look a little bit back into church history now to better understand and the origins of Christmas. And actually, I don't have anything really exciting to share with you about the origins of Christmas. Most of what I have to share is that a lot of the things people allege about the origins of Christmas, frankly, according to the best scholarship out there, just simply aren't true. In fact, there's more than one date for which people celebrate Christmas. In fact, the better known of the two dates is the latter of these two dates, January 6th, which was known as Epiphany or the Theophany. And this was a time to celebrate the birth or the baptism of Jesus. And it's only later, several centuries later, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries, that over time there begins to be a second date, just a little bit, about 2 weeks before that, on December 25. And gradually what you see happening is the Church of the West, centered in Rome, starts observing December 25, and the Church of the East, the Eastern Orthodox Church, tends to emphasize more January 7. But here's the kind of interesting thing, is that there are many Christian groups that celebrate both of these dates and see them as significant. So it's not to say that one date is superior than the other. So here you have these two different aspects of the origin of Christ, his birth, the Epiphany. Which of these two dates is correct? Well, the frank reality is we don't know. There is some ambiguity. There's a little bit of mystery there. And because there's been mystery in the early Enlightenment period, some critics of religion and Christianity began to make assertions that these were not reliable claims, and so began to point, well, then, therefore, this must be something that the early Christians just carried over from the pagans. But the latest scholarship on the history of Christmas, and I find this most intriguing, and if you really are interested in this topic, you need to look at the Oxford Handbook of Christmas. It just came out in the last 3-4 weeks, and I happened to have attended a scholarly session at a conference about 2 years ago, so I knew it was coming and some of the research in there. And the Christmas scholars that are out there that have devoted their lives to studying Christmas are quite emphatic and clear that there doesn't appear to be any pagan holiday that the early Christians borrowed from in order to make December 25 significant. The closest are assertions, well, there's the winter solstice, the seasonal things that point to the sun, and so some people have alleged, but then that's still 4 days apart, and there's no pagan calendar that has an actual date. So and that's to assume that there was a unified pagan calendar, because most of the pagan groups were tribes that all had different calendars. And so the more you do research, the more that I've done research in the topic, the more it becomes increasingly clear that there doesn't appear to be any credible evidence that there is any pagan origins to Christmas. Which raises the question, what then? If Christmas didn't have pagan origins, then where did it come from? Well, there's one other theory which I find quite interesting, and that is the idea that of Christ's conception being on April 6th, the Julian calendar of Artissimos, which would be the Jewish equivalent of the Nisan or the Passover. And so if Christ was conceived in April, therefore 9 months later, you do the math, it makes sense that then therefore Christ's birth would be somewhere between December 25 or January 6, depending on which of the two different branches of Christianity you belong to. Well, there's still some fuzziness there. It doesn't appear to really be exactly clear where the origins of Christmas came from, except to say that it's pretty certain that there was not any kind of pagan origin to it. It seems most likely that early Christians wanted to remember Christ's birth and to honor his birth as part of the early Christian calendar, and it became something that early Christians adopted. So there's a bit of mystery there. Things begin to change in the story of the history of Christmas in the 19th century. While Christmas was a public church kind of feast, it wasn't something you would necessarily celebrate in your home. You might have some kind of religious service at church. In the 19th century, you began to have what was called the domestication of Christmas, where Christmas began to be something that was in the home. And there's kind of an interesting story behind the scenes on that. And I've got two very interesting pictures here I want you to see. The first of them is an early picture of Queen Victoria and her husband Albert. And this picture appeared in London magazines. It's been colorized, and it's one of the earliest pictures that we know of an actual an engraving of a Christmas tree. And so people loved this. People loved Queen Victoria. It was a golden romantic age. And so Queen Victoria took this idea of having a tree in the home, which, by the way, goes back to the Protestant Reformation, the German Reformation. So actually, the whole idea of Christmas tree is very not Catholic at all. It's actually totally Protestant all the way, which is I find very interesting. And so in the Anglican Protestant Church, Queen Victoria takes and popularizes this idea that had become a carryover from the German Protestants. And through mass print, through newspapers and magazines, this picture was widely distributed. And there's a second version of it that I want you to see here. And this is in Godey's family home book, which was sort of like a popular magazine in the 19th century. It was like Martha Stewart's or whatever magazine that you happen to like that talks about homekeeping. There were millions of copies of this magazine. It was eminently popular in the 19th century. And so here's an adaptation of this picture of Queen Victoria, this engraving with her husband, and again with a Christmas tree. And so you see that the idea of, again, taking a very public, a very church event, and it begins to become domesticated or brought into the home as a family kind of event, a family celebration in the home with the children, where there's even the giving of gifts. Gift giving, really, this is where we begin to see this becoming quite popular. And so this takes hold of America during the 1850s in through the 1860s. And certainly by the 1870s, it was widely popular in America. Some common practices were usually you would put up your Christmas tree. You'd find something out in the woods near your home, and you would bring it in on Christmas Eve. So to decorate the tree would be something you would do with your family on Christmas Eve. So typically having a Christmas tree for several weeks or months before in your home wasn't that the Victorians wouldn't have understood that. They would have seen this as a simple kind of thing that you would put maybe some decorations, some treats, even some candles, although that tended to have some hazardous effects if it caught on fire. So you didn't want to have a tree too long. So that'd be another reason why to have it just very briefly on that Friday evening. So you begin to see that the idea of Christmas, the Christmas tree, it's something where people can celebrate their family, they can celebrate the story of Christ's birth, and it is incredibly popular. Which raises the question, if as this is becoming popular in America and it's changing American culture during the 19th century, this is the time of our early Adventist pioneers, that our church was being founded, and they were having to wrestle and deal with these same kinds of issues, same kinds of challenges. And so how did our early Adventist pioneers deal with this concept of Christmas, right? Well, I was excited, as I do research and love to go back through and find the sources, find the evidence, right? That in the review, that fairly consistently our earliest Adventist pioneers were very positive about Christmas. In fact, some people had questions, raising questions about Christmas. One of those persons wrote to Uriah Smith, and he said, well, we don't really know the origins of Christmas. We know that there is a disagreement on the day, that the Church of the West celebrated December 25. The Church of the East celebrates January 9, but we know that it's very unlikely, I'm summarizing or paraphrasing for Uriah Smith, but very unlikely that he was actually born on that day, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't celebrate it. Another person wrote into the review, J.M. Aldrich, the head of the publishing work, and he, in a very bold editorial, in capital letters, said, Christmas and New Year's coming. So you can sense that there's this sort of enthusiasm for Christmas. And he added, the little folks, of course, must be remembered on these occasions. And in fact, he went ahead and talked about candy, sugar birds, and rubber dogs. So I haven't been able to figure out what rubber dogs are, but it must have been some kind of 19th century game or treat. So clearly he was excited and happy to know that Christmas was coming. And then I have a picture here of one more person, Marian Davis, who may, for those of you that are familiar with Ellen White and her prophetic ministry, may recognize that name because she was one of Ellen White's most trusted editorial assistants, helped Ellen White with the book Steps to Christ and several of her other very significant writings as somebody that would help to gather them and edit them. And Marian Davis wrote one of her very first articles ever in the review, and it was a Christmas poem. And I want to read it for you here. She wrote, "'Tis Christmas time, gladdest festal time of all the year. Happy songs arise, and joy bells chime. Thou dost greet with gifts the friends most dear." So again, you get a very clear sense that Christmas was very welcome and embraced as the American culture changed and began to adopt Christmas as a very popular event within American culture. Which, as time went on, it's not surprising. Some of the questions and concerns people have today that I mentioned at the beginning, questions about the origins of Christmas, people began to ask, is it really okay? Are you sure? Writing to our pioneers, even to Ellen White, asking, are you sure it's okay to celebrate Christmas? Well, the earliest evidence I've been able to find of an Adventist Christmas service occurred in 1879, and the Battle Creek congregation, which was most of our church leaders at church headquarters, they went ahead and found a Christmas tree that was donated by one of the ladies of the church, and it said that with alacrity that they put that Christmas tree up into the foyer of the church. As they put that up into the foyer of the church, there was some cause for concern, some questions. Are you sure that's a good idea? And church leaders were emphatic that this was a good thing to do, that they were actually putting money on the Christmas tree to raise money for some of our earliest missionaries. Now, you'll recall only about 4 or 5 years before that our first official missionary family, Jane Andrews with his 2 children, had left for Europe. So this was a time of the awakening of consciousness in our Adventist past about the importance of a worldwide mission. And so they saw this, they're taking this popular cultural event and using it in a way that can help to further the mission of the church. I love that, don't you? To think of what can we give to make a difference to help others come to know Jesus Christ. We're also told that as they were had that Christmas tree, that on Christmas Day that they actually had a Christmas worship service, a special Christmas service where they sang hymns and they talked about the birth of Christ. It was a very worshipful kind of event in the context of Christmas. Which also, if the Adventist pioneers, they're in Battle Creek, well, someone might raise the question and say, well, maybe, they got carried away by the culture of the day. Ellen White surely must be against Christmas, right? And you would be wrong. because Ellen White, actually the same time period, 1878, 1879, as Christmas became especially popular in Adventist circles, 2 Christmases in a row, Ellen White wrote some of her most poignant statements about Christmas and how Adventists should respond to Christmas. And I'd like to read just a very few quick excerpts here for you. In the first of these articles, titled Holiday Presents, she talks about there is some danger, some caution in each year in being aware of how much money is spent on Christmas presents, and that it can become a fad, and that people can be tempted to spend too much money on themselves and others, perhaps to the detriment of their family. They spend money that they shouldn't, which I think all of us would probably realize is a temptation. That is a danger, and I'm thankful that Ellen White brings a little bit of balance here and caution. Be careful how you spend your money. And she writes, going on, that the more important thing to remember in Christmas, she says, and I quote, Jesus is our benefactor. In other words, Jesus is the one who's given us the ultimate gift. And this is an opportunity to acknowledge and appreciate the gift of Jesus through himself coming to this earth. She goes on to say, let us remember that Christmas is celebrated in commemoration of the birth of the world's Redeemer. In other words, what I see happening here is Ellen White's taking a popular cultural moment, something that's becoming very popular in the world around them, and saying, hey, let's not ignore Christmas, but rather let's transform Christmas so that as people are thinking about this holiday, that we remind them about the ultimate present that Christ has given through his birth and through his sacrifice on Calvary. The second of these articles was the following Christmas. Now, this is 1879, and again, you'll, if you know, with Adventist history, again, as I mentioned, Andrews had gone overseas. Our earliest missionaries, they were struggling. They're just trying to eke out to survive. There wasn't a missionary program and any regular kind of financial support. And in this article, she reminds Adventists to, again, avoid the extreme of frivolity, extravagance, gluttony, and display. Again, don't spend thousands of dollars, she warns, on needless indulgence. But instead, she challenges, and I love just how balanced Ellen White is, between these two extremes, no Christmas and going crazy on Christmas, this sort of balance in between here, where she says that we Adventists, find my spot here, if we have this opportunity, and I quote, to make the coming holiday an occasion in which to honor and glorify God. In other words, let's keep Christ at the center of what Christmas is all about. In fact, at the end of that article, she says, she says it's not a bad thing to give gifts to loved ones around us. But instead of just giving them random gifts, why not be intentional to think of purposeful gifts that might just help somebody grow spiritually? So if you're going to buy a book, why not buy a book that might help them and interest them to grow spiritually? Or thinking of young people that might not read doctrinal literature, she encouraged them, maybe parents could buy a copy of Joseph Bates's autobiography, which at that time was a Christian narrative of one of the other founders of our church, a very riveting account of adventure on the seas and how he came to faith in his own personal religious experience. What I see is Ellen White, again, is trying to be somewhat countercultural. Take what is going on in culture, but don't pretend like you're in another world and that Christmas isn't happening at all, but rather transform it. Use it in ways that are constructive, that lift up Jesus. Keep Christ at the center of Christmas. One final thing is, some people might ask the question, well, what about that Christmas tree? Remember about that Christmas tree at that first Christmas service in Battle Creek, but surely Ellen White wouldn't have approved of a Christmas tree, right? Well, you would be wrong, because one of the early Adventist sisters, as they would call themselves, probed Ellen White with the burning question, because she was quite worried about this idea of having a Christmas tree, fully expecting Ellen White would condemn it. And Ellen White instead responded. She said, and I quote, "You can make it like the world if you have a disposition to do so, or you can make it as unlike the world as possible. There's no particular sin in selecting a fragrant Christmas tree." What I love about Ellen White and our early Adventist pioneers is that they challenge us. They remind me that Christmas is a very meaningful time of the year for a lot of people, including me and my own family. But as we do that, as we celebrate this Christmas holiday season, we don't have to be Scrooges, or we don't have to condemn those that are putting up decorations or anything else like that. But we can also remember to keep a balance, not to go crazy and go overboard or spend too much money, that we have an opportunity both individually and as a family, as a church family, and even our community, that we have this privilege, this sacred duty and opportunity to invite people to reflect upon the birth and as well as the death of Jesus coming to this earth as the ultimate gift. I hope that as we continue with this holiday season, that as we've spent some time reviewing a little bit of church history and Adventist history, that you'll be challenged as well to keep Christ at the center of your Christmas holiday season. God bless you.